And I love what you've said about the authenticity piece. It reminds me of when I was pretty much my first job after university, working as a software engineer in a really great company, and the culture was really strong. But
Mm,
I guess, especially back in the days, there's always this aspect of what it means to first be professional and then what it
mm,
means to work in a male dominated environment. And for me, of course, it wasn't something that was written anywhere else. It wasn't really the culture, it was kind of as a perception. I felt like I had to match the guys, if that makes sense. It
mm,
was very startup environment, but obviously big company, but startup mindset, so jeans and t-shirts. And I felt like, what would happen if I wear a dress or a skirt? And I went for months before I had the courage to actually put a dress to work. And when I did, the only feedback was like, "Oh, you look nice today." But that was
mm,
it. There was no comments of it's inappropriate, or some people didn't even notice, didn't even bat an eyelid. But I
yeah.
think that speaks strongly to how do you allow people to do that. And another company
Mm,
I've witnessed where they were working on this diversity culture was when one person who was in the company for many years transitioned, and on the
mm,
first day after they transitioned, so they had to change the pronouns and the name, the CEO actually sent an email. She sent an
mm.
email to the entire company, explained what's happened, and so reminded us about the culture and how we were working really hard for people to bring their entire self. And I think that really made a difference to the way they were welcoming the company.
100%. I mean, that's fantastic that that was done. It was showing that support quite openly with the rest of the team to know this is like we want to celebrate this. This is what's happening. We hope that everybody will be understanding and be on board, but we make everybody aware that this is what is happening within the workplace. I think that's really nice from an inclusivity perspective. And what you said also reminded me of, I remember having a conversation with another lady. I believe she was Nigerian. I might have got this wrong. I think she might be Nigerian. And she was talking about how she felt embarrassed to bring her packed lunch to work because it would be, food that perhaps would smell a bit different from a Marks and Spencer's or any other supermarket brand sandwich.
Yeah.
And so it felt awkward about bringing her lunch that she wanted into the workplace, which obviously is incredibly sad. And times have changed, thank God. But I was thinking like a way to address that would be and having these kind of events, sessions, or something that are not contrived, don't get me wrong, but more of a celebration. So, so and so today is going to teach us how to cook this, like her home food, for example. We're all going to learn like a dish from her country. And then you would have got everybody over the fact that, they'd never tried this woman's kind of like country's food before, the different smells, the different textures, etc. Because everybody's had the opportunity to try it, and then it would make this person, this lady I was talking to, feel less awkward or ashamed, and it would make the workforce more understanding. But obviously, it can be done in a much more kind of like fun, light-hearted way than I've just explained. But getting to understand each other's culture is definitely a really important part of this.
Some of the most important things that I've learned for myself. Um, it's almost all personal stuff. It's all around personal growth for me. I've realized, I certainly don't have ambitions to be worth 10 million, 100 million at any point. What I've realized about myself, my ambitions are to you know to be able to have a good life and to have obviously financial security and be relatively successful. But what comes with that is you have to be, well, in my opinion, you have to be open to growth. Who I was at the start of Rise is very different to who I am now, and in a lot of ways, I'm very happy with. And if I could go back and give myself some advice, it's mainly around self-care. I would say to myself, look after yourself in this journey. It's a long one. It's a tough one. Don't be too hard on yourself. And I've learned that there are some traits in myself and some ways that I like to work. For example, I enjoyed being a sole founder because it forced me to learn so many skills. But that definitely hampered the growth of my company. If I had have taken on co-founders who were up to the job, great CTO, someone who can handle marketing and sales, it could have grown a lot bigger. But because part of the reason why I love doing startups is that I'm forced to learn so much, I'm aware of what the limitations of my own approach to startups are.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that I admire in you is the ability to always constantly learning about yourself, changing, adapting, and just the resiliency. And again, even in my own company, when I started Athena Leaders, it's been 3 years and a bit. I'm getting on a bit now, but it's been an incredible journey. It's with a lot of highs and lows, with a lot of exciting moments and learning, and even just starting my podcast. I started my business being called the Mary Poppins of Business, and then I had to rebrand everything to go to the Mary Poppins of Startups, because I just realized that that's the world I love and I'm passionate in. And again, you go from so now I'm going to go so much into startups. Coming from larger companies, you need to start a completely new network, mindset, learning, and then all of those. So yes, it's definitely a journey. And again, when you're talking about attributes there, one of the biggest things I've learned is patience. I always say that, yes, I have a lot of skills and talents, but patience is something that I have to learn. I'm the kind of person that I have an idea. I'm like, yes, I'm excited. I jump straight in and I start working. I'm like, what are the results? And I'm like, yeah, okay. When you code, it's great. I think that's what I love about coding. You write, you run it, yes, I work, no, I don't work. But when you run a business, you're like, oh, come on.
Where's that million? Come on.
How do you help startup founders when they are on their way to kind of start looking for their first customers?
So we talked about customer development. Prior to that is product market fit. So once we're assuming that they have product market fit and we've validated that there are customers out there, then we can start to talk about, okay, now how do we capture more of them? So there's a number of different ways, right? So we start to build out personas, almost like, okay, who's the perfect buyer? Who's the most likely person to actually buy this? And then we potentially create marketing around that perfect buyer. And that perfect marketing could be a series of email messages. It could be a script for a phone call. It could be a series of LinkedIn messages. It could be every single possible way that you could figure to get hold and get in front of that person, including, of course, advertising, paid advertising, and things like that. Yeah, but ultimately, it's in my opinion, finding your bulk. Remember the bell curve there? Finding this bulky bit here is something that even the more advanced startups fail on. Now, I've done a lot of work in Silicon Valley, in San Francisco. Everywhere here is blocks, right? And if you imagine a startup, and if you imagine the queue outside their front door, and that's their current business, yeah, you only really understand what the total opportunity is when you walk up to the edge of the block and look around the corner. Because once you look around the corner, you understand how much more business is coming that way. Now, I've seen Series A, Series B startups funded to the tune of $60, $70, $80 million, raise that capital just on the base of seeing who's in their queue right outside their front door, not necessarily going up and having a peek around the corner. Yeah, and consequently, what happens? Yeah, the startup, it starts to implode. People start throwing things at each other. Elon Musk comes along and sacks everyone. I don't know, or everything in between those two scenarios. Ultimately, it's not as scalable, as everyone thought initially. So that's interesting. But if I come back to the initial question, right? Okay, so how do we find a customer? Well, where do your customers live? I mean, Nelly, where do your customers live?
Well, LinkedIn, lots of forums that are based on startups, accelerators, all that's lovely stuff.
Exactly the place where many of my customers live. So ultimately, starting to boost your profile as a person of influence. Someone who is actually active in the ecosystem, who can not only be, the friendly face of wonderful podcasts and startups and things like that, but also someone who's going to add value. Yeah. I was having this conversation just the other day with someone. We're talking about, all right, it's all about relationships and it's all about relationships. I said, whoa, hang on. That's kind of going back to the 80s and the 90s. Yeah, everything was relationships, who you played golf with, who you hung out with in bars, etc. But now it's more about the value add that relationship can bring. So if I can make someone a superhero within their organization, which I've been lucky enough and fortunate enough to do many times in my career, and that person now started off as X and now is Y, that's a value-added relationship. So if I can find those kind of people, the kind of people, we used to say, I was with a startup called Deep Coding, and the CEO, Sebastian, and I, we were constantly trying to find that person we could make a superstar. Yeah. So who can we find to make a superstar? And you articulated it perfectly. Where are they? Everyone's on LinkedIn. Yeah. If they're not on LinkedIn, well, okay, maybe you've got a different B2C type model, but certainly for B2B, everything's on LinkedIn. There's engagement tools on LinkedIn. There's automation type things you can do. There's all kinds of different things, but work on your profile. Make sure that you're a person of influence, in your area. And sometimes people start coming to you for advice. Offer, office hours. Mentor other people in your specific field. Over the last 8 months or so, I've done something like 200 office hours for Founder Institute. It's a lot of time and a lot of effort, but the wonderful opportunities that I now have are pretty much directly as a result of doing everything there for free. So put yourself in and amongst your community, whatever that community is.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, in a way, it actually sounds really, really good, but some people might say that it's actually harder than you think because of what goes into our heads. Because I think, I'm definitely up for reaching out to people and building my community online profile. And in fact, this is something that I learned the hard way myself over the last 3 years of building my business. And I think everything that you've said today, I can definitely resonate with the steps that I've had to learn and grow as I'm growing as well into this world. But there are many people out there that still worry about just putting themselves out there, right? And why do you think that happens?
There's so many different ways I could take the answer to that, Nelly. But I think the first thing is the successful people that I see are able to, even if it's not their core strength, articulate their own value proposition and articulate the value proposition of their company by telling a story. They might be, neurologically diverse. They might be, not used to having to do that kind of thing. But ultimately, even if they're a hacker, even if they're a programmer, ultimately, if I can hear my granddad laughing here, he always used to say to me, Colin, if you don't blow your own trumpet, no one else is going to do it for you. Yeah, you've got to talk about your value in this space. You've got to talk about why you're different, and you've got to talk about why Nelly right now. Yeah, and I'm having these conversations on a daily basis. And it is the psychological shit. Oh yeah, well, I'm not a salesperson. Yeah, is the typical objection I get. And I promise I'm not going to swear on your podcast.
I'll go for it.
Absolute hogwash. Let's use hogwash as a term. That's absolute rubbish. Yeah, because if you've got off your backside to create a startup, and again, I go back to my previous comment, you owe it to that person to tell them all about it. You owe it to the world. So if you believe in it, tell people about it. Have a conversation about it. And, if I go to big business, just quickly, we're very, very metric driven in many, many big businesses. MQLs, marketing qualified leads, sales qualified leads, sales accepted leads, opportunities, etc., etc. And these conversion rates are highly measured and highly, highly tuned. In the last startup I worked with, we removed all that. And it was just all about conversations. Yeah. And the more conversations you have, I guarantee, as long as the business is viable and it's a decent idea, the more conversations you have, the more revenue, the more sales, the more opportunity, the more leads, and so on and so on, the bigger your pipeline and the more fun stuff that you're going to do. If you don't talk about it to people, how are they meant to know about it? It's, again, it comes back to that psychological shift, Nelly. I used to use this in the past with us enterprise salespeople. In big corporates, you're used to having a team of people around you. One of the best people and best roles that's massively underrated are sales development and business development people who get on phones and and do that. You can hear singing in the background. I think Spain have just beaten Costa Rica, so apologies for that.
Brilliant.
One of the most underrated roles that there is, but it's one of probably the hardest role in sales. And very often I've had to ask these guys to just think psychologically, you're not asking for anything here. You're showing off. Yeah. You're giving this person on the end who doesn't know anything about the Mary Poppins of Startup show. You're giving them the opportunity to hear all about this wonderful offer that's going to make the Mary Poppins show just so much better. So why would they not listen to that if they're truly invested in their own business? It's such a simple little trick, but it really works.
So what do you see as a challenge for companies, regardless of the size, whether small or big? What do you think is the challenge for companies in adopting this idea of designing an employee experience?
I think it's a huge shift for most companies to start thinking about focusing on the experience at an equal level than that they're focusing on the product. And I think they should. There's a mutual value proposition in that. It also costs 3 times an employee's salary for them to leave or for you to fire them. So it's expensive to not invest in it. And I don't know if it's simply going to take kind of the drawn out length of however long this great resignation and reshuffle is going to last. I think we have a few more years of it, to be honest with you. And I think in a lot of ways, people just aren't privy to the fact of how successful it can be to have a tenured employee and to really invest in their employees. I think we focus so much on kind of that shareholder, that the customer, that we need to be equalizing the playing field with a stakeholder mindset. So we're creating a longevity system where everyone is helping one another. And that means an equal investment in our customers, in our employees, in our shareholders, in our environment, in our communities.
Yeah, and in fact, I see that quite a lot in the startups world. Of course, there's a lot of challenges in terms of the amount of money they might have available. But at the same time, as you said, replacing someone from your team is actually quite expensive. And it's better to be more proactive than to wait for someone to hand in their resignation and then like, oh, by the way, we can do X, Y, Z for you. So how can you help, for example, startups, founders that are just about to hire, 10, they've just got some funding, they're about to hire 10 people in their teams without any kind of focused HR, employee experience, culture, or any of those kind of things?
Hire one now. I mean, my biggest piece of advice is get your executive people person in now, or somebody who has an acumen for understanding sociology, anthropology, and psychology, and how to really design an environment of belonging through language and being able to translate the feeling of the founder and that founder's mission and that company's mission to magnetize the right people into that company.
are entrepreneurs, and people continue with their running their business, whether it's a startup or not.
Yeah.
So how would you answer that? Why are you still in the game?
At this, I mean, there's many reasons. I mean, first, obviously, is like what we're tackling is so important to us. Like, it's personal, it's important. We're seeing that it's changing. Like I said, just people having open conversations about it is creating such a positive impact in our circles. So that is definitely the driving force for us, is just like, we know that people need this. We know that people need to have better workplace experiences and just feel safe and secure and just be happy, productive in the workplace. All I want is for people to be nice and respectful towards each other in the workplace. It's not a crazy request. And the other is just like, this is what we chose to do. So it's like, you bite down your teeth and you push through. So we could have gone for your classic other job, which, but for the two of us, I think it was just such a important mission. And B, at this point, is we're just, like we said, we're getting good feedback in from people. We have a growing team, and we're just so motivated to really push this through. And every time we get the classic slap of the startup in the face, we're just like, it's like, okay, but we chose to do this. Like, why are we complaining? There's nothing to complain about. We chose to do this. It's going to go well. It's going to be fine. And I remember, I think this was another startup that we spoke to had this really good advice of just don't take the highs as too highs and the low as too low. So whenever you get like bad news, you're just like, okay, it's fine, we can take it. Just like take it as like normal news. And also when you get really good news, it's just like, okay, great news, we move forward. And so that's something that we've noticed, is like, we've become so accepting of bad news that whenever we get bad news, it's just like, cool. Like one of us in the team needs to give a pep talk because the other two will be like this. And one of us who just like needs to step up the game and be like, guys, it's fine. They weren't the right investors. It wasn't the right time. It wasn't the right thing. We know what we're worth. The other investors that love us and trust in us know what we're worth. It's fine. So the bad news we can take. We really can take the bad news. We got good news about an investment. I remember like a couple months ago, like two of our investors kind of signed the ticket very quickly, and we're just like, yeah, perfect, this group's good. And it was so overwhelming that it didn't even click. And we're like, yeah, so we closed this round. And my parents were like, you did what? And I was like, yeah, we closed it, like we got a good chunk of investment. And they're like, woo, celebrating. And we were just like, no, it's okay, we'll just take our time. And then for 3 days, we're completely destroyed. We were just exhausted and tired because we're just like, oh my God, good news. Like, we're not used to this. It's really overwhelming. So you do kind of get resilience when it comes to just like negative news, and just like not a good setup. Is like sleepless nights, and you're worrying, constantly doubting yourself. So that when it is good, you're just like, this is too much. I need to take a couple of days off because this is too overwhelming. Just like, recenter and then keep going.
Yeah, it's a beautiful story, and thanks for sharing there, because like I really can relate with what you said. And in fact, this is one of the reasons why I appreciate friends and mentors more ever since I've launched on my own to start my business. Sometimes I feel like we're so into focus on what you're doing. Like you say, don't let the highs be too highs, that you might not even know when you've actually achieved something amazing, because you already focused on the next step. So it's nice to have those people around you that will celebrate and cheer you on and help you to move you forward and give you the energy that you need to kind of recharge and continue with the marathon.
Yeah, it's really important to have a good support system, because obviously it's such a volatile environment and you're constantly going through these doubts and questions and you're not sure whether it's going to go well. So to have a solid support system is good, because you're just going to be miserable. So if you have at least positive energy around you, that can help. If you don't have that, honestly, like we've had certain moments where it's just been like, why are we doing this? Like, this is awful. But yeah, I mean, even checking, there's a couple of VCs that we've been speaking to, just like every 3 months we'll have a check-in, because they do, for example, bigger tickets. And I would go to those meetings and be like, I have nothing to tell her. Like, we have no updates. Oh my God. And I sit down and I run her through what we've been doing. And she's like, Helena, like, amazing. You realize how much you've done in the last 3 months. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I guess we have. Like, yay. It's true. And so it's always definitely good to have someone to just like make you pause for a second, be like, you're doing good. Like, you're doing very well. It's fine. Keep going. But yeah, in terms of like your just like overall mental health, it's a lot. It's definitely something that you need to constantly be open about how you're feeling. And like, if you have a bad day, I always tell Eleanor, like, if we have a day where you just feel horribly unproductive and just like generally unhappy, take it off. Like, there's no need to be doing work when you're sad and miserable on your laptop. So we're really mindful of like taking some time for ourselves too, because ultimately I think if you're unhappy and then unproductive, nothing's going to happen. And so I would rather take that time off and then be able to do a better job much quicker, like the day after. But it's definitely, yeah, you have to find a good balance between just like being very resilient and also taking some time.